Our story begins with a woman who is utterly addicted to short dramas and convinced that an authoritarian president will fall for her. She is a 48-year-old divorced nanny who, as it happens, can no longer have children. And so, when the president was drugged, she decided she wanted to become his personal antidote. Sugi did everything possible to stop her, even going so far as to kneel and beg, eventually convincing her to give up that crazy idea. However, the next day, a 50-year-old woman helped the president detoxify, and he ended up marrying her instead. Her aunt, absolutely furious, tricked her into going up a tall building and, when she least expected it, pushed her into the void. She screamed that if Sugi hadn't stopped her, the young master would have married her. She blamed her niece for losing her one true love and a life of happy old age. But then, upon opening her eyes again, Sugi returned to the very day the president was drugged. Her aunt whispered that she had just seen the young master return to his room. It seemed he had been drugged, and he was hiding away to suffer through it alone. The aunt felt she had to hurry before the person who drugged him arrived, so she could be the one to cure him. She was certain the young master would fall in love with her, and she would become the mistress of the house, her voice trembling with excitement. The pain and the suffocating sensation in Sugi's body vanished, and her blurry vision focused on her aunt's greasy face. In her past life, she knew well that the world of the rich is deep and not something common people can handle, so she had knelt to stop her. But she never expected that, far from understanding her good intentions, the woman would end up pushing her into the abyss. In this life, however, she decided she would fulfill her aunt's dream of entering high society. The aunt snapped, asking what that look was for and if she was trying to stop her. Sugi simply smiled and told her aunt to go and bravely pursue her true love. As for that life of happy old age, her niece wasn't going to do anything to stop her this time. What a wonderful niece I am, she thought to herself, quite pleased with her new plan. We see her watch her aunt enter Fu Xinyan's room, and after calculating the time, she ran down to the banquet floor. Her goal was to cry out in front of Mrs. Fu, calling for her attention over and over again. My aunt has disappeared, and I'm so worried about her, she exclaimed, putting on quite the performance. Naturally, her desperate shouts quickly caught the attention of all the prestigious guests. Has anyone seen my aunt? She asked with a frantic gesture, referring to the 40-something-year-old nanny. Mrs. Fu looked at her with pure disdain and whispered to the butler that having old nannies was always a problem. She ordered him to help with the search, and soon the curious guests joined in, looking everywhere for the woman. Eventually, they all arrived at Fu Xinyan's door, and upon hearing the scandalous sounds coming from inside, their expressions shifted. Mrs. Fu glared at Sugi, suggesting that perhaps someone had simply entered the wrong room. After all, how could her son possibly be with an old nanny? To her, the idea was preposterous. It's ridiculous, Sugi replied, but we've searched everywhere. It's possible my aunt is lost in there. She wondered how her aunt could have left, but Mrs. Fu was only interested in getting rid of her as quickly as possible. Who knows? Just go outside and look for her. The lady snapped, clearly losing her patience. Sugi obeyed. She left the house immediately, but instead of searching, she went straight to call the police. The guests, however, weren't going anywhere. They all wanted to stay and see how this drama would unfold. When the police arrived, they didn't just search the room. They insisted on reviewing the security cameras as well. The guests followed closely behind, eager to get a front-row seat to the impending scandal. And there, on the recording, they saw Fu Xinyan staggering into the room, followed by the aunt carrying a hangover soup. After seeing her being abruptly dragged inside, even the police were left momentarily stunned by the situation. And so, the police stayed. They weren't going anywhere until the matter was settled. Mrs. Fu, believing we had nowhere else to go, began barking orders and forcing us to do the dirtiest, most exhausting chores. Sugi couldn't stand that life. She begged her aunt several times to quit, preferring to live in a shack if it meant freedom. She would rather work while studying than be humiliated every day, but her aunt always had an answer ready. The aunt would ask what she knew of the world, claiming that the more a woman suffers, the more easily she wins a president's heart. According to her, enduring such hardship was simply the first step toward finding true love. She certainly talked a big game, all while leaving the dirty work for Sugi to handle alone. And it was Sugi who took the blows. In her past life, the one who actually cared for Fu Xinyan was Tang Jinglan, Mrs. Fu's best friend. Tang was a widow who had been alone for years, and while Mrs. Fu couldn't deny the truth, she could certainly crush them easily. Therefore, Sugi knew she had to stir up a massive scandal to ensure her aunt secured that true love she wanted so badly. The guests weren't enough, so she took advantage of a quiet moment to anonymously leak the security footage to entertainment reporters. Overnight, the scandal involving the president of the Fu Corporation became a trending topic, and the whole world was laughing at the family. The elder Fuss met at the house, completely fed up, just as the aunt arrived early with visible marks on her neck, begging for their acceptance. Fu Xinyan, getting a taste of his own medicine, actually stepped forward and proposed taking full responsibility for the woman. To say Mr. and Mrs. Fu were fuming would be an understatement. They were practically spitting sparks. Under the weight of public pressure, they were forced to agree, though Mrs. Fu demanded a simple legal marriage and nothing more. Fu Xinyan only cared about staying with the aunt and was indifferent to the rest, even though the aunt herself wasn't quite satisfied. She feigned obedience and bowed to the fuss, while he insisted that he only wanted to be with her. He claimed nothing else mattered and promised that, in the future, he would show his mother and father the utmost respect. Mr. Fu, hearing this display of devotion, looked as though he didn't know where to hide his face out of pure embarrassment. "Don't talk nonsense, and don't you dare call me father," Mr. Fu snapped, clearly reaching his limit. Beside him, Mrs. Fu looked just as grim, her face clouded with a dark, lingering shadow. I am barely 2 years older than you. I am certainly not old enough to be your mother. From now on, you will call me madam." "Of course, mother," he replied, which was exactly what she didn't want. We see the aunt taking Suyi by one hand, while clutching Fu Xinyan with the other. "Suyi, from this day forward, Xinyan is your uncle," she announced with a triumphant smile. "And those are your grandparents. Go on, greet them." The Fu family could only stare back with pure resignation. The good news, at least for them, was that the black sheep of the family finally had descendants. The bad news, of course, was that the child wasn't of their blood and was already 17 years old. Suyi knew her aunt was being foolish. Just because they were forced to accept the wife didn't mean they'd accept the niece. With great tact, she spoke up, saying she'd prefer to address them as she always had, since she was used to it. Mrs. Fu let out a disdainful snort, noting that the niece seemed far more sensible than the aunt. But then, with a sudden and calculated lack of tact, Suyi added that she also wanted to register her residency there. Upon hearing this bold request, Mrs. Fu slammed her hand against the table in a fit of rage. "It is embarrassing enough letting Xinyan marry your aunt, and now you want to move in too?" She demanded to know if the girl intended to make the entire Fu family a laughingstock. Suyi responded with a sweet, calm tone, reminding her that the madam had already accepted her aunt. She pointed out that if they threw her back to her village to fend for herself, the public would surely criticize them. On the other hand, if they took her in and transferred her to the city's best private school, everyone would see it as a testament to the immense generosity of the Fu family. "And I will make sure to speak highly of you and Mr. Fu to all my classmates," Suyi added, her tone perfectly innocent. She noted that such a reputation would surely benefit the Fu family's future business dealings with other companies. Mr. and Mrs. Fu shared a look, reflected for a moment, and, surprisingly enough, they nodded in agreement. Later, her aunt looked at her with newfound curiosity, wondering aloud since when she had become so cunning. She asked how Suyi had even thought of moving her residency and convincing them to pay for a private school. Suyi offered a forced smile, knowing that if she weren't clever, her aunt would have sent her away long ago. The aunt waved her hand dismissively, claiming her original plan was simply to get married first. She intended to sweet-talk Xinyan later to find Suyi a comfortable spot in the house as a maid. "I'm surprised you got yourself into private school," she admitted, "but you're smart. You even secured the paperwork. From now on, you must show me a great deal of respect," the aunt declared with an air of importance. She reminded the girl that without her, this comfortable life wouldn't exist, which was one way of looking at it. Suyi kept a smile on her face, but her gaze darkened as she promised to respect her aunt exactly as she deserved. The initial paperwork took only minutes, but we learned that transferring residency between provinces would take a full month. Only after that lengthy process was complete would she finally be able to formalize her school transfer. Her aunt, now ignoring her completely, returned to her primary occupation, fussing over her romantic affairs with Fu Xinyan. So, Suyi took her backpack and headed to the private school, where the trending news had already made her a target. She didn't let the mockery affect her, choosing instead to listen intently to the lessons and seek out the teachers. One teacher, however, met her questions with pure sarcasm, remarking on her sudden, unexpected interest in studying. He cruelly suggested that she should follow her aunt's example and simply look for a shortcut in life. Suyi calmly closed her books and looked at him. She had heard enough from this particular educator. "You are simply jealous of my aunt," Suyi remarked, causing the teacher's eyes to widen in complete shock at what he had just heard. He scoffed at the idea of envying such a woman, but she countered that he merely wallowed in mediocrity while feeling superior. She pointed out that her aunt's man was tall, handsome, and incredibly wealthy, the very picture of success. "How could you not be envious?" she added with a smirk, which, naturally, was the last thing he wanted to hear. Infuriated, he asked how she dared to speak such nonsense and raised his hand to strike her, but she was far too quick. She immediately landed 2 slaps, grabbed him by the hair, and pinned him to the desk, revealing she knew his secrets. She mentioned how, every time the director gave him a ride, he would get out at the intersection right next to the school. She had seen it many times. He was a man who rose from a humble position only to despise children from similar backgrounds. He allowed the wealthy students to bully the others, cruelly telling the victims that they were the ones at fault. She told him he deserved this, questioning what kind of person he thought he was to call himself an educator. We learned that in her past life, it was because of this man that she had suffered countless beatings from her aunt. Later on, she had tried to stop her aunt from bringing soup to Fu Xinyan, an act that changed everything. That small interference had caused her aunt to lose her golden opportunity to enter the highest circles of society. The teacher concluded she was sabotaging her aunt's prosperity and, in an act of pure malice, sold her off to northern Myanmar. He pushed her back with force, but she used the momentum to rip out a handful of his hair as a parting gift. She bolted from the office, knowing full well he would rush to the director to complain and call her guardians. After dodging the security cameras, she ran to the rooftop and carefully tied her phone to a long bamboo pole. She extended it toward the director's office window, hoping to record exactly what was happening inside. The footage was a bit blurry, but it clearly captured a level of intimacy between the two that was far from professional. She hurried back to the office, used the teacher's own computer, and uploaded the scandalous video directly to the school forum. Just as our story's aunt arrived in a flashy sports car, the director's wife appeared as well, and both women marched into the office. One after the other they went, and the aunt, assuming the other woman was just another relative, remarked that children these days were a real headache. She added, with a certain air of superiority, that the teachers of today were actually even worse. The moment she stepped inside, the aunt lunged towards Suyi with aggressive intent, ready to cause a scene. However, the director's wife beat her to the punch, pouncing on the teacher, grabbing her hair, and delivering a thorough beating. The director, absolutely terrified, cried out that it was all a misunderstanding and that the video was surely a fake. He begged her not to be impulsive, but his wife ignored him entirely, forcing him to stay close as the chaos unfolded in the office. The teacher's day ended with a sharp slap. The aunt stood frozen in shock, while Fu Xinyan, arriving just behind, watched the spectacle with quiet amusement. In the midst of the noise, Suyi whispered a cryptic question to her aunt, asking if she still wanted to have her dream wedding. The aunt was left stunned by the question, but Suyi immediately began to cry, putting on quite a performance. The aunt had no idea what the girl was plotting, but she instinctively began to wail at the top of her lungs, just as she had been prompted. When Suyi played the recording of the teacher mocking her, the aunt's crying intensified, fueled by genuine indignation. She sobbed that she couldn't believe this was happening, claiming she felt so humiliated at the school that she no longer wished to live. Fu Xinyan approached them quickly, his brow furrowed as he demanded to know exactly what was going on. The aunt played the recording for him, and in a fit of rage, he snatched the phone and slammed it onto the floor. He scoffed, wondering how a mere teacher at such a second-rate school dared to insult a woman associated with Fu Xinyan. Meanwhile, the director was scurrying about, desperately trying to put an end to the escalating disaster. With his face covered in scratches from his wife, he immediately rushed to Fu Xinyan to offer his most humble apologies. Suyi seized the moment to add fuel to the fire, claiming it wasn't just the teacher, but that everyone was laughing at them. She looked at him pointedly, asking if the young master intended to take responsibility for his own actions. Fu Xinyan, completely consumed by rage, ended the confrontation by striking the director. The teacher fled the city that very night, and to prove he was a man of his word, Fu Xinyan processed my residency registration in the capital the following day. He had me transferred to an elite aristocratic school and even bought me the latest phone model as compensation for the trouble. That evening, on the top floor of a luxury hotel, Fu Xinyan organized a grand marriage proposal and handed my aunt an exclusive black card, the kind reserved for corporate presidents. He promised her a wedding that would be even more spectacular than the one she had dreamed of. The elder Mr. Fu had only intended to quietly post the marriage certificates on the company website. He wanted to keep a low profile, but Fu Xinyan, in a sudden outburst of passion, ended up becoming the center of attention. The scandal was so massive that even the Fu family's foreign clients witnessed Fu Xinyan declaring his love to a 48-year-old woman. They were seen kissing under a rain of petals, and the clients actually called specifically to congratulate the elder Mr. Fu. His blood pressure skyrocketed from the news, and he ended up being hospitalized, which, honestly, was bound to happen. Mrs. Fu scolded her, asking if Xinyan was just young and immature, or if she, being so much older, also lacked any sense of judgment. She demanded to know how she could permit such an embarrassment and how they could ever face his father again. My aunt, meanwhile, gently stroked her face, making sure to show off the large diamond ring on her hand. She replied shyly, wondering how such a thing could possibly be considered an embarrassment. She asked if it wasn't good news, claiming she hadn't expected him to kiss her in front of everyone and that she tried to refuse, but her strength was simply too little. She insisted she couldn't push him away, causing Mrs. Fu to grit her teeth and tell her to drop the fake, affected act. When reminded of her age, my aunt simply noted that Xinyan says that regardless of the years, in his eyes, she is still an 18-year-old girl. This time, even Mrs. Fu couldn't stomach it, and I personally had to hold myself back from gagging at the display. While my aunt and Xinyan continued living out their shameless romance, I moved ahead and started at the aristocratic school a month early. The students there possess a great deal of class, and most of them despise bullying, or at least they don't dare practice it for fear of ruining their family's reputation. For these students, the interests and reputation of the family clan always come before everything else. Since her upbringing had been so different from theirs, they looked at Suyi with genuine curiosity. They asked if it was true that she didn't have to take piano lessons since she was a little girl. They wondered if she really hadn't learned 8 languages or spent her free time studying horseback riding. What about golf, flower arranging, or posture classes? To them, these were the absolute basics of life. They couldn't believe she didn't have to attend social events with adults every single week. She answered their questions with some confusion, and to her surprise, they looked at her with pure envy. The jealousy in their eyes didn't seem fake, and she realized then the vast gap between their worlds. Upon returning home, she took the black card that Fu Xinyan had given to her aunt. She used it to hire tutors, not just for basic subjects, but to learn 8 languages and the fine arts. She sought every skill that would allow her to expand her social network, spending his money quite freely. Her aunt, however, asked why she was learning such nonsense, wondering if the girl thought she was her equal. She told her to stay quietly at home and act like a servant, as was her place. She even promised to find her a driver's son to marry one day, claiming a stable life would be enough. What a wonderful aunt, indeed. In her past life, she would have begged for her approval, but now, she only wanted her money. She told her aunt that everything she was learning was actually for her benefit, since the older woman was too lazy to study. She pointed out that all the rich children and their parents at school spoke multiple foreign languages. She asked what would happen when the young master took her to high society events to meet the other wives. If she knew these things, she could intervene when necessary, making her aunt look sophisticated and prepared. It would show that the Fu family valued their niece, which, naturally, would only make the aunt look better. It's a double benefit, her aunt thought, before telling her to study hard and not waste her money. The aunt continued enjoying her party nights with Fu Xinyan, while Suyi began studying day and night. In the mornings, we see her practicing her posture with tireless dedication. She practiced languages with her classmates in her free time and pushed herself through her studies at night. On weekends, she stayed at her grandmother's house, and during the week, she practiced piano and horseback riding. She didn't rest for a single day. A month later, a commercial event arrived to which Fu Xinyan was invited. Naturally, her aunt wanted to attend as well, taking the chance to show off her jewelry and haute couture dresses. She imagined herself and Fu Xinyan appearing dazzling before everyone's eyes. Since the wedding, she had been under a sort of house arrest by Mrs. Fu, unable to attend any public events. Fearing she might embarrass the family, she took the banquet invitation and spoke to Xinyan in a flirtatious tone. "Look, it says here that guests are allowed. Take me with you. I want to meet important people too." Fu Xinyan responded reluctantly, noting it was a formal banquet for high-level people and questioning why he should take her. He argued she wouldn't understand anything, and if she embarrassed him, his mother would only scold him again. Her aunt quickly pulled Suyi toward them, claiming her niece understood everything and would serve as her interpreter. Fu Xinyan let out a laugh, doubting she could do it without errors and questioning the idea of bringing her. He told her not to talk nonsense, as the invitation was for a companion and the girl was not his family. Besides, he wondered if she really thought a bit of high school English was enough to be an interpreter. To be honest, he seemed to think she mistook a high society banquet for a simple school reunion. The aunt's face darkened. She squeezed Suyi's shoulder tightly and whispered directly into her ear. She reminded her that she had promised this studying would make her look good, which was useless if she couldn't even go out. She warned her that if she failed, she wouldn't study anymore, though Suyi knew that education was her only way to climb the social ladder, and she couldn't quit now. Right there in front of Fu Xinyan, she called a classmate and began a conversation in perfectly fluent English. Fu Xinyan was left completely speechless. She eventually hung up the phone and addressed him with a calm smile. "Sir, my classmate is Director Lu's daughter, and she will be attending the event as well," she explained. She mentioned that Director Lu has an important project and is looking for partners, suggesting that if he took her along, perhaps he could speak with him. Fu Xinyan responded with his usual disdain, asking if he really needed favors from her contacts. Just then, the elder Mr. Fu happened to pass by and noted that what she was saying was true. It was indeed a very good project. He looked at the girl and asked if she was absolutely certain she could get him an audience with Director Lu. She nodded confidently, and so, the decision was made for her to join them. She then suggested that her aunt should come too, noting how odd it would look to others if she were the only one left behind. Fu Xinyan hesitated for a moment before giving the aunt a stern warning. "You can go, but keep your talking to a minimum. Just introduce yourself and then step back." Our aunt beamed with joy and hurried off to change her clothes. As she rushed upstairs, Mr. Fu instructed Mrs. Fu to find a suitable dress for the young girl. Once she was dressed, we see that the results of her month of posture training were immediately apparent. Mrs. Fu's critical gaze swept over her from head to toe, unable to find a single flaw to complain about. When she came downstairs, she found her aunt wearing exaggerated makeup covered in jewels and sporting a gown with a massive train. Mrs. Fu began to massage her temples in frustration and told her bluntly to go back and change. "It's a banquet, not your wedding," she remarked, which, to be honest, was a fair point. She added that her niece looked much better than she did, especially without that ridiculous long train dragging behind her. Our aunt then managed to trip over her own hem and tumbled down the stairs, which, to be honest, was bound to happen eventually. Mrs. Fu's face darkened instantly at the sight. "How embarrassing," she exclaimed, clearly reaching her limit. She told her to go and change immediately, but Fu Xinyan stepped in, tenderly helping the aunt back to her feet. "There's no time left," he insisted. "Just leave it as it is." The aunt leaned shyly into his arms, playing the part perfectly. "Thank you, Xinyan," she whispered. "You are always so thoughtful and attentive to me." Fu Xingyan seemed to relish being the protector in that moment, reminding her that, after all, he was her husband. He asked who else would protect her if he didn't, while Mrs. Fu stood nearby, literally trembling with silent rage. Goodness, she muttered. Sometimes I really feel like calling the police over this nonsense. And we can certainly agree with her there. Suyi traveled in the same car as Mrs. Fu, though the atmosphere remained incredibly tense. At the very least, the two of them were behaving like normal people for the duration of the trip. They managed to avoid any public displays of affection, and upon arriving at the banquet, Suyi's classmate, Lu Ruyan, spotted her. She approached with genuine enthusiasm, dressed in her formal attire, and the two girls greeted each other warmly. A wave of nostalgia washed over Suyi as Rian told her how wonderful she looked that evening. When Suyi returned the compliment, telling her she looked beautiful, the girl's face immediately flushed a deep red. One has to wonder if she is truly that innocent. Just then, Director Lu himself approached the group. "So, you are the transfer student my daughter talks about so much," he noted with a friendly smile. He mentioned hearing that she was brilliant, so much so that even the top students at the school felt inferior to her. Suyi gave a modest nod, calling him uncle and insisting she didn't deserve such high praise, as she'd only been lucky with her grades. He admired her humility and emotional intelligence, noting she was the polar opposite of his own daughter, who was a girl of few words. He then looked toward the others and asked who they were. Suyi was about to introduce them, but Mr. Fu cut in with a laugh. "We are Shu Yi's grandparents," they announced, which was quite a surprise, considering they were finally admitting to the relationship. Director Lu shook their hands, but just as he turned to speak with Suyi, Fu Xingyan abruptly dragged her to one side. He stepped forward to shake the director's hand and insisted on talking business, leaving the man looking visibly annoyed by the interruption. Meanwhile, Mrs. Fu spotted her best friend across the room and went over to offer a greeting. Suyi noticed where Tan Jinglan was looking. However, her eyes weren't on Mrs. Fu, but fixed firmly on Fu Xingyan. She began to wonder if, perhaps, their relationship in her past life hadn't been an accident after all. Deep down, she knew she didn't have enough power yet, and she couldn't afford to let her aunt lose her position. She gave her aunt a subtle signal, but the woman responded by giving her a sharp, hidden pinch. "Honestly, you stupid child," she hissed. "Aren't you happy for me?" She seemed to believe that the CEOs in real life were just as intense and dedicated as those in her dramas. She was certain Xingyan would never be unfaithful, convinced that she was the only one in his heart. Suyi simply gave her a thumbs up in response, a silent gesture of mock approval. It was her way of saying, fine, just forget I said anything." The aunt realized this wasn't the right place for a scene and finally let go of her arm. "I'll deal with you when we get back home," she threatened with a smirk. She looked up toward Mr. Lu and whispered to Suyi, asking if her studies included certain social skills. "How do you approach the big bosses?" she asked, to which Suyi evasively replied that one simply has to be likable. "Is it really that simple?" the aunt mused, before releasing her and moving to take Fu Xingyan's arm. "Hello, Mr. Lu," she said smoothly. "I am Xingyan's wife." She then looked around and asked, "And where is your wife? Why didn't she come tonight? Could it be that he didn't bring her because he doesn't like her?" At that, Mr. Lu's face darkened visibly. In high society, everyone knew that Mr. Lu had recently become a widower. It was a subject no one dared to mention. Fu Xingyan, feeling utterly embarrassed, quickly pulled his aunt back away from the man. "Forgive her, Mr. Lu," he stammered. "She has only just returned from living abroad." The aunt blinked her large eyes, which were a bit too youthful for her age, surprised that Fu Xingyan was helping her elevate her status. "Yes, I've just returned from abroad," she added. "Customs are much more liberal over there, you see. If you want a divorce, you simply get a divorce," she continued, oblivious to the tension. She suggested that if one isn't happy, like her in-laws, who only stay together out of pity, it's better to divorce and find one's own happiness. Mr. Lu was practically trembling with rage. "Discuss this amongst yourselves," he snapped. "I am leaving." With that, he turned on his heel and walked away without a single backward glance. The aunt immediately grabbed Fu Xingyan, who was desperately trying to follow the man and apologize. "Xingyan, I had no idea Mr. Lu would be so shy at his age," she remarked, completely missing the point. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked. "Do you look down on me too?" Fu Xingyan simply sighed. He hadn't before, but in this moment, he certainly was, just a little bit. Suyi sighed as well, realizing that Mr. Lu likely wouldn't be spending much more time in her company after this. Mr. Lu told her with a touch of resentment not to worry about the fallout. He promised he would ensure his father collaborated with the Fu family regardless of the scene. But Suyi shook her head. She truly hoped he wouldn't get involved in that mess. Her contacts were far too valuable to be wasted on something, or someone, that simply wasn't worth the effort. And then, the aunt approached her to demand an explanation. "What on earth did you teach me?" she questioned. Xingyan mentioned that Mr. Lu was furious, and Suyi simply looked at her with a touch of disdain. "I told you to find a way to please them," she reminded her, "not to steal their attention for yourself." After that, we see Suyi spending most of her time by Mr. Fu's side. She watched him in silence as he attended to executives, mentally noting the business trends she overheard in their chatter. Just as she was immersed in their conversation, the aunt dragged her away, and to be honest, she had a point. "That woman is suspicious," the aunt whispered. "She offered to introduce partners to Xingyan, but look at her. She wondered what kind of older woman acts so affectionately, clinging to his arm while they are apart. Just a moment ago, she had even leaned on him, pretending to be a little too drunk. And now, the aunt continued, they are whispering in a foreign language that I can't understand. It turned out there was a problem, but Suyi felt no particular rush to start translating for her. Tang Hinglan switched to French upon noticing them nearby, leaving Fu Xinyan looking utterly confused. With years of business experience, Tang Hinglan then switched to English to discuss Mr. Lu's project. I can help you obtain it, she proposed, but how do you plan to compensate me? As Fu Xinyan watched her, Tang Hinglan's elegant shawl slipped, drawing his gaze toward her shoulders. Thanks to years of aesthetic treatments, Tang Hinglan still possessed a certain charm at 50 years old. The aunt, with her childish tricks, might hold Fu Xinyan's interest for a while, but certainly not forever. On one hand, he had a useful, sophisticated businesswoman. On the other, a foolish troublemaker. The difference was obvious, and the aunt, sensing it, gripped Suyi's arm tightly. What are they saying? She demanded. They've been staring at each other for so long. She needed a translation, but before Suyi could find a solution, the aunt lunged forward and slapped Tang Hinglan. How dare you try to seduce my husband? Tang Hinglan was stunned for a moment, but then we see a triumphant smile in her eyes. She didn't shed a single tear. Her display of forced strength deeply moved everyone present. Mrs. Fu rushed forward and slapped the aunt, shouting, Are you out of your mind? How dare you lay a hand on my best friend? Fu Xinyan, seeing Tang Hinglan's reddened cheek, also struck the aunt. How dare you touch Aunt Lan? The aunt, quite spoiled lately, was completely beside herself after receiving 2 slaps. And just as she was about to lose her temper, Suyi whispered in her ear, She is on another level. You are no match for her. Pretend to faint. The aunt held her breath, and then, she collapsed onto the floor. Suyi rushed to support her and call for a doctor. Upon returning to the Fu house, the aunt continued to feign unconsciousness. Following her suspicions, Suyi slipped away to the surveillance room. While she searched for clues about the banquet, Mrs. Fu stood by the bed, still screaming, Vulgar woman. What a vulgar woman. I said we shouldn't bring her, and now look. Not only did she offend Mr. Lu, but she also offended my best friend. Fu Xinyan was also deeply disappointed. You usually pretend to be so weak, but a moment ago, you nearly tore my scalp off. You've made me a laughingstock in front of everyone. The aunt was filled with indignation, but on the way back, Suyi had warned her. If she didn't want to be kicked out of the Fu family, she had to keep up the act until the very end. She simply had to wait for news and endure it, especially after the massive scene she caused at the reception. Social media trends were dominated by our family, the new jewel of the Fu family, and the Fu president himself, caught in an autumn romance. Mr. Lu's project depended entirely on Mrs. Tan's mediation. Now, naturally, he must be in a complete panic. You are a disgrace. It would be best to send you to a psychiatric hospital for a while, the mother declared. In a few days, make sure she divorces Xinyan, she continued, already planning the next move. I will take it upon myself to explain everything at the police station. Fu Xinyan looked at the aunt. There wasn't much sadness in his eyes, but he felt he had no other choice. Take that niece of hers too. I don't want to see them anymore. The aunt suddenly erupted, finally dropping her act. I am not going to any psychiatric hospital, for it was Tang Xinlan who seduced Xinyan first. Was I really wrong to hit her? She asked, only to be told, stop talking nonsense. She is my best friend, the godmother who watched Xinyan grow up, Mrs. Fu insisted. Do you think everyone is as shameless as you are? At your age, still trying to crawl into a man's bed, she added with a sneer. And don't call me mother. I'll make the call right now. Tonight, you and your niece are leaving this house. Come here, tie her up along with that burden she brought, she ordered, just before the bodyguards entered. Suddenly, the aunt's phone rang. Upon seeing the content, her eyes widened in shock, and she shouted for them to wait. The aunt showed them the security video on her phone, telling them to look and see for themselves. There it was, the undeniable proof that it was the other woman who had seduced Xinyan. In the video, we see Tang Xinlan taking advantage of the servant's distraction to slip something into the drink. That camera had been installed by Mrs. Fu herself to stop the servants from stealing food, an ironic twist, to be sure. Tang Xinlan never imagined, not even for a moment, that her actions were being recorded. Fu Xinyan murmured to himself, realizing at last that it had been her all along. Mrs. Fu was left speechless, while Mr. Fu massaged his temples. One guards against thieves and fires, but rarely against friends. And were you guarding me too? You didn't expect her to set her sights on our son, did you? Mrs. Fu collapsed into a chair, asking herself if this was really what it had come to. Is this something to be proud of? We can use this video to make her get us that collaboration between Mr. Lu and Xinyan. Don't you ever see her again, she ordered, though Fu Xinyan remained deeply lost in his own thoughts. Watching his reaction, the fact that Tang Xinlan had targeted him with such tactics seemed to flatter him secretly, rather than cause him any shame. From that day on, Fu Xinyan stopped paying any attention to the aunt, and Mrs. Fu certainly noticed the change. Feeling relieved that her son had finally woken up, she began looking for every possible opportunity to test the aunt's patience. The poor woman served her mother-in-law all day, and at night, Fu Xinyan wouldn't let her rest either. In the early hours of the morning, we see the aunt hiding away in the servants' quarters for a moment of peace. Sui, come here and give my waist a massage, she called out to her niece. I'm studying, Annie. I don't have time for that. Go to your squats in the courtyard then. Tomorrow you will be the one to go and serve that unbearable old woman. I'm going to arrange for someone to come and give me a beauty treatment instead. My skin has become so rough lately. A moment ago Xinyan touched me and said my skin felt prickly. I can't, Andy. I have a skin exam tomorrow, the girl replied, trying to find an excuse. What exam? Even if you graduate from university, you'll never be a high society woman, so don't bother. Don't waste your time. Go and help me deal with that old lady instead. When she finally passes away, the Fu family fortune will be all mine, she added, already tasting the victory. Are you afraid you won't get a good life? She asked, to which Sui replied, what good life? Marrying the daughter of a driver? I didn't come back to this life just to have her give me orders. Deep down, what she truly wanted was to become a member of high society herself. She set down her pen and began to manipulate her aunt, playing her like a delicate instrument. Only by appearing pitiful enough will you be able to secure the young master's love, she suggested. What is it that you have to offer that is so special? The aunt asked, confused by the shift. The conversation drifted into the chemistry of their shared history, growing up in such difficult circumstances. I'll try, she murmured, though her mind was already miles ahead of the current situation. Unbelievable love, she thought, wondering if the effort was even worth the meager reward at the end. Yes, we brought a lot of luck to those who were troubled, and it was an honor to take the risk for love. That was the truth, as she hoped the rivalry was born from genuine passion rather than a simple attempt at attention. In that moment, she felt she had positioned herself perfectly, ready to play her part in every upcoming game. A month passed, and the aunt's self-sacrifice finally pleased Mrs. Fu, who then began focusing on the aunt's womb. Terrified, the aunt saw a traditional doctor, forcing Sui to help. You're in menopause and still want children? The aunt began taking traditional medicine in secret for 2 weeks, hoping to cure what the doctor called impossible. She hadn't reached her limit yet, but Fu Xinyan had. After 10 p.m., he tried to leave, but she stopped him. You and your niece smell of Chinese medicine. It makes me nauseous, he snapped, heading out for fresh air. As he drove away, the aunt ran crying to Mrs. Fu, who simply laughed, glad her son was finally having fun. With nowhere else to turn, the aunt came to cry to Sui, who mocked her for losing her legendary resources. With university exams a month away, Sui demanded her expensive elite courses be renewed in exchange for her help. For 3 more months, without a problem, she had her plan. She tracked Fu Xinyan's location through his Apple ID and found him at an exclusive club, slipping in through the kitchen. She went to the locker room, took her time securing a waitress uniform, and found the private room where Fu Xinyan was waiting. And as expected, the person who called him there was Ten Jinglan. A man can hardly leave behind his habit of cheating, especially knowing she's willing to do anything for him. He was like a fly to honey, unable to stay away, so she took photos of them in an intimate moment. She pixelated Tan Jinglan's face and sent the photos anonymously, while the unedited versions went straight to Mrs. Fu. She didn't let her aunt see them, fearing she would ruin everything. She simply told her aunt that Fu Xinyan had gone out looking for women and a scandal was coming. The aunt cried and made a scene, threatening everything. Honestly, not even a professional mourner could compete. Fu Xinyan's infidelity was hurting the company's reputation, so Mr. Fu placed his wife under house arrest. As for her son's tastes, Mrs. Fu certainly had plenty to say about that. While she preferred 18-year-olds, Fu Xinyan seemed to prefer those much older. Mrs. Fu stopped trying to separate them and began to feign indifference, while the aunt continued her desperate charade for months. Under the heavy pressure of his parents, Fu Xinyan actually began to feel a sense of remorse toward the aunt and started treating her much better than before. He didn't even mention the smell of the Chinese medicine anymore, which was a significant improvement, all things considered. Our aunt finally realized the truth behind those lines at the start of short dramas. This story was becoming a work of pure fiction. She worked harder on her figure and skin, learning new tricks to please Fu Xinyan, and made sure to rinse her mouth immediately after taking her medicine. Furthermore, she would spray half a bottle of breath freshener before even thinking about returning to the bedroom. As for Sui, she managed to get her classes renewed. With only half a month left until the exam, she felt completely overwhelmed by the pressure. That day she arrived and saw Mrs. Fu there. She wondered if they had finally discovered that her aunt could no longer get pregnant. We see Mrs. Fu laughing, but why? Sui walked in and found Fu Xinyan sitting on the sofa. He was stroking the aunt's belly with an expression of pure happiness. Could it be that she was actually pregnant? Mrs. Fu turned to her and said, Sugi, you're going to have a little brother. She then looked at the aunt and asked, Sufin, why did you keep such wonderful news from me for so long? The aunt stroked her belly with immense pride, claiming she wasn't sure before and feared it might just be a false alarm. But Mrs. Fu, being as attentive as ever, had already called for the doctor to confirm the news. Mrs. Fu then turned to her and asked, by the way, Sugi, why did you come back in this heat? She simply wiped away the sweat, telling them it was nothing at all. She returned to her room to keep solving her practice problems, without shedding a single tear. She couldn't help but notice the way Mrs. Fu and Fu Xinyan were looking at her. A little later, her aunt came to find her, calling out her name, Sugi. I see that coming and going is very tiring for you, she said. Why don't you move into the school residence? She suppressed a smile and replied, all right, Auntie, I'll come back to see you on the weekends. But the aunt insisted there was no need for her to come, suggesting she'd just call if she needed anything. She told her to focus on her studies, which was perfect, as she had wanted to live at the residence for a long time. In the past, her aunt always refused because she needed someone to do the heavy, dirty work around the house. Now, everything had changed. The aunt was pregnant, and she had suddenly become a nuisance. As she packed her things, her aunt handed her a mere 1,000 duanes. Thinking it was far too little, she hugged her aunt and feigned a heart-wrenching sob. Auntie, I don't want to leave you, she cried. I'll call you every single day. Fu Xinian, clearly fed up with the drama, threw 50,000 duanes her way to make her stop. You're an adult now, he told her. You should be independent and stop bothering us. The aunt said nothing after hearing that, simply turning away while stroking her belly. And so, she stopped acting immediately. As long as the money was sufficient, she was satisfied. Deep down, she realized this might be the very last time she would ever see her. From now on, the life she led as a high-society wife would depend entirely on the aunt herself. The elite school's residence was quite luxurious, and since there were so few people, it felt rather exclusive. She was even able to choose a private room, which, after she moved in, became a secret base for the children of the wealthy. They would come to complain about their parents whenever they were bored, and she welcomed them with open arms. While they were there, they shared imported snacks and, more importantly, valuable trade secrets. She used the 50,000 duanes Fu Xinian had given her to invest in the stock market, guided by memories of her past life. Combined with the key information she gathered from her millionaire classmates, it was a guaranteed win. By the time the university entrance exams were over, she had already earned nearly $500,000 as starting capital. Seeing how capable she was, her classmates began handing over their own money for her to multiply. Managing their funds was an excellent source of income, and she planned to rent a place off campus for the summer. She intended to review her university courses and study market trends. By the time school started, she could found her own company. Who could have guessed that her aunt would get into trouble again? She was viewing an apartment when the call came. Dear niece, come quickly to the Imperial Hotel. I'll see you there, her aunt urged. She asked for help, wondering how she could make Xinian lose interest in Tang Yinlin, while Sugi questioned her casually. She couldn't help but wonder how he had managed to get involved with Tang Yinlin once again. Her aunt began to whimper, complaining about the difficulties of being an older mother. She was suffering from severe nausea and bleeding, and the doctor insisted that she absolutely had to rest. Even so, Fu Xinian couldn't help himself from wanting to touch her. It was her own fault for being so charming, or so she thought, leaving Sugi speechless. The aunt continued, explaining that Mrs. Fu had finally made the decision to kick Xinian out of the bedroom. They assigned someone to look after her, and she had only enjoyed a few days of peace before Xinian lost control. He had run off to find Tang Yinlin, though Sugi asked, quite confused, how she could be so sure that was where he went. An unknown number sent her photos and a location, and her aunt insisted she was on her way to catch them in the act, urging her to hurry. The threat was clear. If Sugi didn't show up, her aunt would cut off her financial support entirely. But of course, she no longer needed that money. She simply finished up at the apartment, where the agent suggested a roommate. By sharing the 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom place, she would only have to pay half the rent and still maintain her privacy. Just as she agreed to the deal, her aunt called again, and this time, Sugi decided to answer. Her aunt said nothing, but the sounds of Fu Xinian and Tang Yinlin enjoying themselves were unmistakable. It seemed the phone had dialed from inside a purse. We hear Fu Xinian speaking with a passion he usually lacks, telling Tang Yinlin how remarkably well she is aged. He even claimed she was much better than Su Fan, who, in his eyes, had done nothing but eat since becoming pregnant. He cruelly joked about leaving her there, but suddenly, the aunt's voice broke through the line in a furious scream. She demanded to know how he could say such things when she was carrying his child, a fair question, to be honest. Immediately, everything dissolved into absolute chaos as Fu Xinian shouted Su Fan's name in shock. He demanded to know how she found them, ordering her to let go and calling her nothing more than a servant. When he asked if she dared to hit him, she replied that she was hitting him precisely because he deserved it. She accused him and that old fox of seducing her man, and the confrontation turned physical. Suddenly, cries of pain rang out. While the aunt clutched her stomach, Xinian noticed Tang Yinlin was losing clumps of hair. Furious, Fu Xinian threatened Su Fan, telling her that if Tang Yinlin went bald, he would shave Su Fan's head in return. He ignored his pregnant wife's distress, insisting that he had to take Tang Yinlin to the hospital immediately. The aunt continued to moan in agony, pleading with Xinian about the pain in her womb and the safety of their child. He coldly told her to stop faking, claiming Tang Yinlin hadn't even touched her and that she had sat on the floor herself. Accusing her of trying to harm the baby, he left for the hospital, promising to settle the score with her later. Stay here and reflect on what you've done, he snapped, while she insisted through her tears that she hadn't lied to him. She was in agony, crying out about how much it hurt, a pain that seemed to go entirely ignored. She begged Xinian to save their baby, calling him a wretched coward as he prepared to walk away. She reminded him that she was his wife, but her only answer was the cold, final thud of the door closing. As her screams grew weaker, Sugi, listening on the other end, couldn't help but think how foolish the woman had been to go there. We see Sugi hang up the phone, call an ambulance and the police, and then calmly return to school to gather her things. A little later, the aunt called again, demanding to know where on earth Sugi had disappeared to. She explained she was at the hospital about to undergo surgery and ordered Sugi to come and sign the consent forms. Sugi pointed out that she was still over a month away from being a legal adult, so her signature wouldn't be valid anyway. She suggested calling Mrs. Fu instead, which caused the aunt to break out into a fit of cursing. It turned out everyone had gone to see Tang Yinlin, leaving the aunt alone to face a miscarriage surgery that no one seemed to care about. She called Sugi ungrateful, claiming she had raised her for nothing, which is a bit rich, all things considered. Sugi simply reminded her that they were the ones who said they never wanted to see her again. She had done exactly what they asked, and yet, they still weren't satisfied. At that point, the doctor took the phone, explaining the urgency of the surgery. They would allow her to sign for herself, but he urged Sugi to come immediately, as her aunt's condition was very grave. Very grave? Well, Sugi decided that if that was the case, she might as well go to say her final goodbyes. When she arrived at the hospital, her aunt was still in surgery, having suffered a severe hemorrhage during the procedure. Because her aunt had a rare blood type and the hospital had no reserves, the nurse had to make an emergency announcement over the loudspeaker. They were desperately hoping that someone with the same blood type would step forward to donate. As we watch the doctors and nurses rushing in and out, Sugi is reminded of her previous life in northern Myanmar. Back then, unable to bear the lies, she had begged Brother Biao at the compound to let her call her aunt to save her. But the aunt had replied with chilling coldness, claiming she wasn't Sugi's aunt and that they were just trying to trick her. She even told them to stop bothering her and never to call again. And then, she added that since Sugi had a rare blood type, perhaps her blood could be sold for a good price. That day, Sugi was thrown to the floor and drained of blood, bag after bag, until she could no longer feel her own heartbeat. Fortunately, if you can call it that, Brother Biao had his eye on her blood and organs for profit. He didn't let her die immediately, but that moment taught Sugi exactly who her aunt was. In this life, she simply chose not to help her. She felt her debt was paid. After a grueling 4-hour surgery, the aunt barely managed to cling to life. Mrs. Fu appeared then, glancing sideways at Sugi, who sat perfectly still and let out a mocking sneer. The doctor informed Mrs. Fu that the aunt had personally signed the consent forms to have her uterus removed. Mrs. Fu simply nodded, noting with a cold smile that this certainly made things much simpler. Deep down, Sugi felt a flicker of disappointment that she hadn't been the one to send the woman to her grave. Not long after the aunt was moved to her room, she woke up and, seeing Sugi there, immediately tried to lash out. Sugi told her not to hurry, mentioning that someone had been waiting for her for a long time as she opened the door. The aunt turned her head, snapping that no one cared when she lost the baby. So why were they here now? The Fu family lawyer coughed awkwardly, explaining he was there on behalf of young Master Fu to deliver the divorce papers. The aunt turned her head in complete disbelief, asking if this was Xinyan's idea or Mrs. Fu's doing. The lawyer explained it was Mrs. Fu's decision, though the young master had already provided his signature. With eyes red from crying, the aunt screamed, demanding to know exactly where he was. She demanded he come see her, but I intervened, noting that he was in Tan Hinlin's room, where the entire Fu family was currently pampering her. She asked if I really thought they would let anyone touch a hair on her head, insisting it was impossible for Mr. and Mrs. Fu to allow it. She was certain they would never permit Xinyan to stay with Tan Hinlin. I couldn't help but laugh at her, knowing Tan Hinlin's status and her talent for manipulation. After all, would she really fail to manipulate Mr. Fu, a man who thinks only of his own interests? As for Mrs. Fu, she is just like my aunt. She has no real voice in the family, so why would anyone think she is in charge? My aunt refused to accept the truth, begging them to call Xinyan so he could see her, insisting he promised to be good to her forever. Mrs. Fu walked in just then, looked at her, and let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. She remarked that her own husband had promised to listen to her forever, and her son had promised to love her for eternity. And in the end, nothing changed. She offered another $1.5 million, telling her to use it wisely for her retirement. She told her to sign immediately, but my aunt refused as her tears fell uncontrollably, just like in those dramatic novels. She believed that no matter how far the male lead wanders, he always eventually returns to the protagonist. She told herself she would wait for the day Fu Xinyan regretted everything and came searching for her desperately. Mrs. Fu finally lost her patience, huffing that they would simply proceed through the legal system instead. After she and the lawyer left for Tan Hinlin's house, I advised my aunt that if she wanted him to regret it and find her, she had to divorce him first. I asked her how he was supposed to come looking for her if she was the one desperately clinging to him. Enraged by this logic, my aunt turned around and tried to strike me. I simply took a step back, causing her to miss, and seeing she couldn't touch me, she grew even more frustrated. She arrogantly ordered me to act, asking if I wasn't supposed to be the clever one. She told me to go beg on my knees, to cry, and to cause a scene at the Fu family's door, to do whatever it took. She insisted that I had to make him change his mind, asking if I really thought I'd ever get into an elite school without her. We see that Mrs. Fu, meanwhile, had already made her way over to Tan Hinlin's house. She reminded me that even if I was just a minor character destined for a quick exit, I could still hold out by refusing to sign those divorce papers. After all, they were still legally obligated to pay for her caregiver. As I walked out, I could still hear her screaming at my back from down the hall. She shouted that everything was my fault and demanded to know why I hadn't stopped her back then. I had to laugh, because I certainly had tried. In this life, however, I wasn't about to waste another second on her. After leaving the hospital, I headed straight to the school to move my belongings into my new home. There, we find Lu Rian waiting. She smiled and teased that I couldn't possibly be the owner of such a place. I explained that I'd bought it using the New Year's money I received as a gift last year. Everything inside was brand new, from the bed and the sofa to the water heater. I told her that if there was anything she wasn't satisfied with, she only had to let me know. I stepped closer and looked Lu Rian directly in the eyes, which was a bold move. When I asked if she liked it, Lu Rian's face turned a deep shade of crimson. She admitted that she did like me, but confessed that she was more worried about my well-being than anything else. She simply wanted to take care of me, and in response, I gave her a genuine smile. I thanked her, but felt I had to be completely honest about my plans for the next 10 years. I explained that I wouldn't be dating anyone. My focus would be entirely on my studies and building my own company. To be perfectly honest, I felt that having a relationship would only get in the way of my productivity and making money. I told her that in 10 years, if I'm successful and she's still single, well, Lu Ruyan could only swallow hard at the thought. She asked if he would be with her then, but he simply shook his head in response. He explained that he would eventually choose the most suitable person from among those trying to win his heart. As for marriage, well, that would depend entirely on how he felt at the time and how that person treated him. Lu Rian could only stare in shock. He felt a bit cruel, perhaps, but this was his plan. He wasn't about to change his entire future just because she was being kind to him now. At this point, all he could offer her was an apology, as there was nothing more to say. As he prepared to leave, Lu Rian stopped him, calling out his name, Sui. She insisted on renting the house to him, telling him to stay there and accept it as help from a friend. She promised to work hard herself, telling him they would eventually meet at the top. Afterward, Lu Ruyan didn't move in with him, and though she said nothing, she only charged him half the rent. On the day the exam results were published, some wealthy friends insisted he join them on a video call. They wanted to see the results together. We see that everyone else was surrounded by family as they opened the portal. He was the only one alone, which was likely the very reason they had insisted on watching with him. They feared he would have no one to comfort him, unaware that he had deliberately lowered his grades to spare their dignity. This, naturally, led them to the mistaken conclusion that his academic performance had taken a turn for the worse. Lu Rian, for her part, truly believed he was sad about how things were going. To be honest, he found the whole display unnecessary, but since they were his employers, he couldn't exactly refuse. When the results appeared, he looked at the empty table and felt a sense of calm. It was exactly what he expected. Seeing him so quiet, everyone immediately rushed to offer their condolences and support. He just lowered his head and smiled. There was no point in pretending anymore, so he showed them his blank results table. One of them asked, with a note of confusion, if Suyi had simply forgotten to write his name on the exam. As they wondered why the page was blank, Mr. Fu stepped forward and gave Lu Rian a sharp clip on the head. He called him a fool, pointing out that Suyi had actually placed among the top 20 out of 20,000 people. He was, in other words, someone the rest of them would never be able to catch up to. The classmates who had been so busy offering comfort were left stunned. A second later, his phone began to explode with notifications. He quickly ended the video call, and that very same day, representatives from 2 major universities arrived at his door. They had come to discuss his potential major and, more importantly, the benefits they could offer him. Since he already had a clear goal in mind, he didn't spend much time hesitating over their offers. Even as dawn approached, his heart remained restless. He was now one significant step closer to his ultimate success. The next morning, the sound of the phone woke him, and on the other end, he heard the sweet, overly kind voice of his aunt. She chuckled softly, telling Suyi that his dear aunt had simply been missing him lately. He woke up instantly, wondering if she had somehow found out he had been accepted into a prestigious university. He had specifically asked his classmates to keep the secret, and he doubted they would have betrayed his trust so quickly. Wary of her intentions, he told her that if she had something to say, she should just say it over the phone. She insisted it was nothing, claiming she just missed him and asking him to meet her in a private room at the Dunhuang Hotel. In the end, he decided to go, and upon arriving at the private lounge, he found his aunt already waiting for him. After only a few days apart, her hair had turned gray, her face looked gaunt, and she was dressed like a common street vendor. We see her looking quite disheveled, despite the fact that she was wearing 2 pieces of very old, heavy jewelry. In the past, she never would have dressed this way, let alone worn such outdated and unfashionable trinkets. She rushed to embrace him, crying out that she had finally come to her senses and realized he was the only one who truly cared. She told him she had decided to divorce Fuxian, promising they would take that 1.5 million and move abroad together, wherever he wished. In his previous life, these were the exact words and the very embrace he had longed for more than anything. But now, as we can see, they didn't manage to move him in the slightest. His aunt made him sit down and signaled the waiter to start bringing out the various dishes she had ordered. He stepped away to the restroom for a moment, grabbed a bottle of mineral water and a glass, and then returned to the table. He sat there quietly, sipping his water while keeping his eyes fixed firmly on his phone. His aunt, meanwhile, wouldn't stop piling food onto his plate, fussing over how thin he looked and begging him to eat. He served her a large portion in return, suggesting that she should be the one to eat instead. She just laughed at the sight of the food, claiming she wasn't hungry despite how excellent the dishes looked. He set his chopsticks down and remarked that she had truly changed, which, to be honest, was quite the understatement. He reminded her that in the past, whenever there was good food, she was always the first one to dig in. She used to leave him the leftovers, always insisting that a woman must take care of herself before she can care for others. During the awkward silence that followed, she watched him with deep suspicion while he lowered his head and tugged at his collar. He complained about the heat, wondering aloud if the air conditioning in the private room was even turned on. His aunt let out a visible sigh of relief and moved closer to help him, noting that it did seem rather warm in there. He then suggested she take him upstairs so he could freshen up and cool off. Suddenly, he pushed her away quite abruptly, demanding to know exactly what she had done. His aunt moved toward him again and pulled him into an embrace, calling out Suyi's name in desperation. She pleaded with him, reminding him that she was his only living relative and asking if he would truly help her. She confessed that Fuxian had promised to treat her well, provided Suyi helped secure a deal by entertaining some wealthy women. Although he already suspected it wouldn't be anything good, hearing it from her own lips left him feeling a cold emptiness in his heart. His own aunt, for the sake of a man, hadn't hesitated to throw him into the fire, and he shouted at her, questioning how she could. He asked if she had drugged him, reminding her he wasn't even of age and demanding to know if she was even human. His aunt quickly covered his mouth, desperately telling him to keep his voice down. She asked who would ever know if he just stayed quiet, but he simply rolled his eyes at the absurdity of it all. He wondered if she thought he was crazy enough to ignore the pure and virginal heiress, Lu Rian. At that very moment, an impatient Fusinian burst into the room. He demanded to know why they were taking so long, and if the boy had finished eating yet. He noted that since he had eaten, it didn't matter anyway, and told her to just hand him over. Without a moment's hesitation, his aunt pushed him right into the man's arms. She reminded Fusinian of his promise that, after this was over, he would stop seeing Tang Jing. She insisted that he had to keep his word and that he couldn't deceive her now. Fusinian gave a dismissive, evasive reply, telling her that the matter was no longer any of her concern. Thinking of what a wonderful aunt he had, Suyi grabbed Fusinian by the hair and slammed him against the dining table. He then began to forcefully shove the drugged food into the man's mouth. Fusinian was caught completely off guard, and by the time he could react, he had already swallowed several mouthfuls. He clutched his mouth, realizing he'd been tricked, while the aunt hurriedly waved her hands in denial. She claimed she saw him eat, but he just grabbed his clothes from the chair and removed a hidden microcamera. He revealed that he had recorded the entire process, including every detail and the true purpose of their plan. He explained he only ate from the parts that weren't drugged, telling them both to prepare themselves for prison. Fusinian lunged forward to snatch it away, accusing him of a trap, but Suyi easily dodged the clumsy attempt. The drug's effects began to take hold almost instantly, and the man collapsed to the floor, his strength utterly gone. He couldn't help but scoff, noting that they were the ones who had set the trap in the first place. Fusinian screamed at the aunt to stop him, warning her that if he called the police, she would be the one behind bars. With a fierce look in her eyes, the aunt pulled a knife from her bag, calling him an ungrateful brat. She demanded the camera, and for a moment, his heart sank. He knew she wouldn't show him any mercy. He handed it over obediently, and she grabbed it as if it were her very life before rushing to Fusinian's side. But he snatched it back just as quickly, while Fusinian struggled to his feet, swaying and hurling threats. He warned Suyi that if he dared to open his mouth to the world, he would never leave him in peace. Our protagonist left the private room without a single backward glance, just as the sound of police sirens echoed outside. As it turned out, he had already uploaded the video directly to the official police website. Reporting it online was a smart move, especially since the case involved a minor, a serious crime, and he was the year's top student. With every card in his favor, the decision of these two idiots to move against him now was, to be honest, complete stupidity. The police and the school provided double protection, leaving him unafraid of family retaliation while the media rallied to his side. Consequently, the shares of Fusinian's company plummeted, and many clients wasted no time in canceling their contracts. By the time the new semester began, the storm had passed. Fusinian was near bankruptcy, and Suyi's own company was safely established. Thanks to the contacts he'd built over the years and the public sympathy from the case, he managed to find his footing quickly. Fusinian tried to sabotage him several times, of course, but Suyi resolved those little obstacles with ease. At the first court hearing, we see his aunt sitting in the defendant's dock, her hair disheveled and her spirit broken. She looked like a completely different woman, her face now weathered and covered in spots and deep wrinkles. The moment she saw him, she screamed his name, pleading that she had simply made a mistake. She begged him not to send her to prison, reminding him that they were, after all, family. She asked what kind of nephew reports his own aunt, but her face only reminded him of his past life. He remembered pleading just like that, his throat dry from screaming, while she refused to even call for help. In his mind, he was being merciful. At least she was going to a cell and not to a much darker fate. He looked at the judge and feigned a look of utter devastation, a nice touch, to be honest. He noted coldly that there aren't many aunts who drug their own nephews for business deals, either. Realizing the sentimental card wouldn't work, Fusinian and the aunt immediately pivoted to hurling insults. And finally, justice was served as the aunt was sentenced to 3 years behind bars. Fusinian appealed constantly, shifting all the blame onto her, and ended up with a 1-year sentence himself. A year later, she was released to find Fuya was a tiny company, while Suyis had become an industry leader. He had become completely unreachable, leaving a resentful Fusinian to spend every day plotting a petty revenge. But he couldn't even get close to Suyi, so he resorted to shouting insults at public events instead. He accused Suyi of sending him to jail and questioned how many businesses he'd funded with other people's money. Suyi didn't even blink, simply gesturing for his bodyguards to remove the man by force. Fusinian screamed that he was being assaulted and threatened to call the police. The irony was palpable. The bodyguards simply scoffed at him, asking if he was dreaming or just delusional. He told him that with President Su's massive fortune, they could easily afford any legal fallout from the scuffle. Eventually, Mr. Fu arrived on the scene and dragged the humiliated Fusinian away. He called him a disgrace for causing trouble so soon after his release and ordered him to leave the country immediately. He told him that if he weren't his only son, he wouldn't care one bit what happened to him. And so, Mr. Fu sent him abroad that very same night. After that, we see that Suyi never crossed paths with Fusinian again. The Fu family's situation seemed to be worsening, but he didn't lift a single finger to help. He didn't know who was behind their downfall, but as he found success, everyone heard of his 10-year plan. No one dared to flatter him to his face anymore. They simply maintained a polite, friendly distance. At social events, the elders would joke that they had to live longer just to see who would win his game. The day of his graduation arrived, which, coincidentally, was the same day his subsidiary went public. After the opening ceremony, he put on his gown and went to take some photos with his professor. Suddenly, someone jumped right in front of his car. He slammed on the brakes just in time to avoid hitting the person. He rolled down the window and asked what on earth was wrong with them. He asked if they were trying to die by faking an accident, but then the stranger approached the window. It was his aunt. Though with her hair turned completely silver, he barely recognized her. She looked incredibly aged, her face marked by 2 very visible scars. To be honest, he wouldn't have known it was her at all if she hadn't spoken. She asked if he was heading to school, and he realized she had finally been released from prison. She admitted she was out, noting she never expected him to become quite this wealthy. He told her that fate had been kind to him, and his days of suffering were over. She remarked on how expensive his car looked, and then, quite boldly, told him to open the door. She insisted on coming inside to sit for a while, but he didn't unlock the door and simply looked at her with cold indifference. He asked if she had already forgotten why she went to prison, telling her to leave because he wanted nothing to do with her. He stepped on the accelerator and drove away, needing to arrive before the graduation ceremony came to an end. Later, his secretary called to report that a woman was lying in front of the company entrance and refusing to leave. She was claiming to be his aunt and demanding to see him, as she now had absolutely nothing to her name. To protect the company's reputation, he told his secretary he would handle it and asked her to help him find someone. By the time he reached the entrance, a large crowd of curious onlookers had already gathered to watch the scene. He walked straight toward her and calmly told her to get up and follow him inside. His aunt stood up quickly, asking her dear nephew if this meant he had finally forgiven her. She praised him for being such a good nephew, while he said absolutely nothing and simply led her to the office. His aunt looked around at everything with wide-eyed curiosity, noting it was even more elegant than Fusinian's old office. She then turned to him and asked, with no small amount of greed, exactly how much he was worth now. He rested his chin on his hand and asked if she still hoped to have some kind of connection with Fusinian. He wondered aloud if she expected a story where the powerful CEO falls for the ex-convict. His aunt lowered her head and revealed the news. Fusinian was dead. According to Mrs. Fu, shortly after going abroad, he caught an illness and didn't last even 2 days. The most satisfying part, she added, was what happened to Tan Jinglan when she unknowingly crossed paths with him. She had gone looking for him, and, as the story goes, she ended up catching the same illness. Now no one knows where she died, which, to be honest, sounds like a bit of divine justice. His aunt reached out and took his hand, remarking that everyone who had ever heard him had finally gotten what they deserved. "Can we go back to how things were?" she asked, while he simply smiled with a touch of irony, knowing they weren't the ones who had truly hurt him. "It was you," he reminded her, as his aunt's eyes filled with tears. Apparently, after 3 years inside, her acting skills had only improved. To be honest, her performance was even more convincing than it used to be. Looking at the massive company, she asked how he could have the heart to let his own aunt beg on the streets, her eyes wide and her facial scars looking quite fierce. She looked ready to cause a scene if he didn't give in, but he merely curled his lips into a faint smile. Of course not, he said. We're family, and no grudge lasts forever. She sighed with relief just as the internal office phone began to ring. The secretary announced that President Su's guest, the young President Liu, had arrived. We learned that Liu Ruiyan is also in university and is set to take over the family branch next year. By now, she has become a well-known and respected young president in her own right. He told the secretary to show her in, then turned to his aunt and suggested she go to the lounge to bathe and get some rest. He explained he had an important client, and his aunt nodded obediently just as Liu Ruiyan walked through the door. Watching his aunt head toward the lounge, he gave Liu Ruiyan a silent gesture and led her toward the window. Knowing his aunt would be eavesdropping, he pretended to adjust Liu Ruiyan's collar and leaned in to whisper. He asked why she had come and who she was looking for, playfully suggesting she already had him. She looked at him, momentarily stunned, and asked if he already knew who she was searching for. Your uncle, he replied, as he had known Sun Shufan was about to be released from prison. He had already started looking for him, and it seemed their plans had aligned perfectly. Liu Ruiyan looked at him, her face appearing much more mature and sophisticated than during their high school days. President Su, she said, confirming that this time, she had indeed tracked down his aunt. We see a flicker of internal agitation in him, but he quickly recovers his normal tone, asking if she has noticed something significant. He then offers to hand over the land that the Liu group has been desiring so much. Liu Ruiyan looks somewhat disappointed, wondering if it's necessary to be so calculating with her as she adjusts the collar of her shirt. She notes that it's quite rare for him to offer to fix her clothes like that. He simply rolls his eyes, knowing that President Liu has been a hopeless romantic since she was a little girl. It seems she wasn't the only one. Since the late Mrs. Liu passed away, many have tried to offer their comfort, but she remained steadfast. Liu Ruiyan never accepted any of them, remaining single to this very day, which, naturally, demonstrates the incredible depth of her devotion. With a mother like that, one has to wonder if it isn't a point in her favor. He decides to push back, pretending not to understand her true intentions. He asks if she's showing off, noting that his own family is just a collection of scoundrels, fools, and the worst kind of opportunists. Liu Ruiyan quickly waves her hands, insisting that isn't the case at all. At that moment, his aunt emerges from the lounge, carrying a set of his casual home clothes. She mentions there are many outfits there, then recognizes the guest as President Liu's daughter. She claims she finally understands why Su-yi is doing so well, assuming it must be due to the help from people like her. Since it's nearly dinner time, she suggests he invite President Liu over to their home for a meal. She offers to prepare 2 of her signature dishes to properly thank them, speaking as if they were one big family. He responds with a cold voice, telling her not to make plans, as President Liu is far too busy. He insists she has commitments tonight, but his aunt approaches and takes Liu Ruiyan by the arm, dismissive of his excuses. She asks him if he's forgotten how to be grateful, claiming a chef's food can never compare to a home-cooked meal. Little Liu, tell me, she asks, when exactly does President Liu have some free time? She insists on being notified immediately, but Su-yi pulls her hand away and gestures to Liu Ruiyan, noting they still have much to discuss as a family. He wonders why there is such a rush to invite them, stating he has pending matters and must take his leave. His aunt makes a face of pure disgust, ready to scold him, but he quickly calls his secretary to intervene. His aunt cheers up instantly, demanding he order a banquet of signature dishes from the Tay Hotel. She wants it sent to the house, having heard that only the truly wealthy can afford to dine there. Exactly, she says, today we are going to get everything up to date. After dinner and work, he takes his aunt home, where the food is already served by the maid, whom he then gives a long vacation. The moment his aunt steps inside, she heads straight for his dressing room to prepare herself. After making herself comfortable, she finally sits down at the table. With a sly chuckle, she asks Su-yi if he doesn't think his aunt still retains all of her old charm. She fixes her hair, remarking that President Liu has absolutely no one in her life. No one to care for her or give her warmth, so she asks for his help to become the next Mrs. Liu. She promises to help him in return, and he simply smiles, knowing that President Liu alone wasn't enough for his plans. He had already found the perfect male lead for her little game of hide-and-seek. He tells her the guest will be here in a moment, leaving his aunt to ask in surprise if he is serious. He assures her not to worry, as the person certainly won't disappoint her. However, he asks her to keep the noise down. Even though it's a detached villa, he still has neighbors to consider. His aunt waves her hand dismissively, noting that when there is chemistry, no one can really control themselves. He nods, suggesting she eat before the food gets cold, as it would be a shame to let it go to waste. Our aunt was so excited she could barely eat. After just 2 bites, she rushed off to retouch her makeup, bathe, and apply a face mask. Just as she was finishing her preparations, the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of our mysterious guest. He went to open the door, and though he hadn't seen this man in nearly 20 years, the image was burned into his memory. The man stood there, old and thin, wearing a security guard's uniform with hollow cheeks that told a story of hardship. According to what Liu Ruiyan had told him, the man was now rehabilitated and had finally given up the alcohol. 2 years ago, he had been diagnosed with terminal liver cancer, and the constant pain had stripped away all of his old temper. Now, as long as someone was willing to cover his medical expenses, he was a changed man. He was prepared to be a slave to anyone who would help him survive, a desperate position, to be sure. Upon seeing him, the man looked at him with those same scrutinizing eyes he remembered from when he was just a child. Who would have thought you would grow up to be the president of such a massive company? He wondered aloud. Our ancestors must be proud, he said, noting that President Liu and the young Liu had warned him before he arrived. He didn't bother giving explanations. If this man could intimidate his aunt, it would certainly benefit his own plans. He promised to pay for the medical treatment to make the man's final days a bit more bearable. His only job was to take care of the aunt exactly as he had done before, so the family could be reunited. The man let out a disdainful laugh and strode into the villa with long, confident steps. Seeing the food spread out on the table, he grabbed a bowl and began to eat without waiting for an invitation. The aunt came swaying out of her room, asking Sue-E if someone had finally arrived to see her. "Is it you?" she asked, while he smiled from the side and announced the surprise. He had found her husband. The aunt immediately began pointing and hurling insults, complaining about how hard she had worked to divorce this scum. He told her a first husband is always best, as Mr. Liu would never notice her anyway, so she should forget that idea. Our uncle, whose mind was still fixated on Mr. Liu, let out a roar, calling her a filthy dog. He sneered that she still hadn't lost her habit of acting like a flirtatious coquette. He grabbed a vase at random and hurled it. The aunt dodged the object, but tripped over her heels and couldn't get very far. The uncle seized her by the hair and began to rain down slaps upon her. The aunt, however, wasn't about to give up and defended herself with every ounce of her strength. She called him an idiot, asking if he really thought she would just stand by with her arms crossed while he hit her. As for the valuables in the villa, he had wisely had the maid put them away earlier. They could break whatever they wanted now. He had already warned the neighbors, who were heading to a hotel for dinner, that there would be plenty of noise due to a recent home renovation. Everyone was quite understanding, so he put on his headphones and sat on the balcony for some fresh air, blocking out the chaos in the living room. This domestic battle finally ended with the aunt on her knees, desperately begging for mercy. Their marital reconciliation turned out to be remarkably simple, in its own twisted way. He bought them a house on the outskirts, a secluded place where they wouldn't bother any neighbors. He scheduled regular medical visits for the uncle's health and arranged for suppliers to deliver their groceries. As for the rest, he didn't involve himself, only giving the uncle one stern warning in case the aunt tried to escape or bother him. If she did, he would cut off the medication. The uncle immediately responded by putting a padlock on the door and locking her in the room. The aunt spent her days screaming, but the uncle remained completely indifferent whenever the noise began to annoy him. He would beat her until she finally stopped shouting, eventually placing her in shackles and forcing her to clean the room and the patio. And so, they continued their lives together in a style reminiscent of a brutal labor camp. When the uncle finally succumbed to his illness, the aunt believed she had at last escaped her personal hell. But, as fate would have it, he sent her, shackles and all, straight to a psychiatric hospital. "I'm not crazy, you ungrateful girl, Sue-E," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "You know I'm not sick. I won't make any more scenes. I promise I won't bother you ever again." Standing behind the safety of the iron bars, Sue-E simply told her aunt that such a thing was impossible. "The doctor says your obsession is a serious mental illness," she explained calmly, "and it requires intensive treatment. Stay here quietly and recover. I'll come to visit you whenever I have the time." As we see Sue-E turn her back to leave, the aunt was overcome by a wave of pure despair. "Sue-E, I'm your aunt. How can you do this to me?" she wailed, clutching at the air. Sue-E looked back at that haggard, aged face, and we can only imagine the 10 years of hell she remembered from her previous life. "Sun Sufan," she said coldly, "you once asked me why I didn't stop you back then. The truth is, I did try to stop you. In my past life, I stopped you when you went to find Fuxinyan. And as a result of that interference, Tang Jinglan ended up going in her place instead. Fuxinyan married her, and because Sufan couldn't fulfill her dream of entering high society, she sold Sue-E to northern Burma. She suffered every imaginable torment there, and no matter how much she begged, her aunt never lifted a finger to rescue her. After 10 years of torture, they finally harvested her organs and buried her alive, a truly horrific end. Compared to what you did to me, Sue-E remarked with chilling detachment, I have been quite merciful. Listen to the doctors. They will treat you well as long as you are obedient. But if you choose not to, well, you are welcome to try and defy them. She added that she had heard their methods were remarkably similar to those used in northern Burma. What nonsense are you talking about? The aunt cried. Even if you've been reborn, I haven't sold you anywhere in this life. Can't you just leave me in peace? She pleaded, but Sue-E only stared back, her eyes filled with a debt that had finally been settled. And who was the one who beat me and insulted me? Sue-E asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the past. Who abandoned me the moment she had her own son? And who drugged me and handed me over to another? She reminded her aunt of how she was discarded once the son was gone, knowing full well what would have happened if she hadn't realized the truth in time. If she had actually taken that medicine, her fate would have been sealed, and not in a pleasant way, to be sure. If I had begged you then, Sue-E whispered, would you have ever forgiven me? Without a single moment of hesitation, the aunt replied that of course she would have. "You're my niece," she claimed, while Sui stepped back slowly, refusing to even look at such blatant hypocrisy. "Then think about it carefully," Sui told her. "Think about how you really acted back then." As she walked away, her aunt's voice continued to call out to her, desperate and hollow. And so, she simply put her headphones back on, out of sight, out of mind, as the saying goes. With that chapter finally closed, we see Sui turn her full attention toward building her career. She proved to be both meticulous and bold, always the first to seize an opportunity when it appeared. She told herself that being young meant she could afford the risk of losing, though she had no intention of doing so. Secondly, she knew she possessed the inner strength to face any difficulty that dared to cross her path. In less than 4 years, her business empire grew to span across every major sector. Her assets soon doubled those of Lucy, officially making her the youngest tycoon of the modern era. The elders who used to dismissively call her kid, or just Sui, had a change of heart. Now, whenever they see her, they refer to her as the Relentless One. A fitting title, wouldn't you agree? Other young women, seeing the value in the projects she touches, now fight for even a small piece of her success. Yet, she remains aware that everything she has achieved today was made possible by the support she found along the way. And the truth is, seeing how the projects I value have paid off, the money never seems to end. But one shouldn't close doors. Sometimes it's better to earn a little less to open more paths. Why not do it? Soon, the 10-year plan was fulfilled, and she achieved the success she had always desired. And the person standing right there in front of her is still Lu Rian. In these 10 years, she never stopped improving herself so as not to fall behind, and in the process, she managed to clear away all of Suyi's competitors. While they call Sui the Relentless One, they call her the Relentless Matchmaker, as she spends her time finding partners for Suyi's suitors. Later on, she became quite famous among many people who didn't like Sui, and those whom Sui didn't particularly care for either. They all sought her out, hoping she would notice them and find them a suitable match. President Lu often joked, telling Sui to wake up and finally accept his daughter. Meeting so many single men just to introduce them to your love rivals is, to be honest, quite a lot of effort for her. Now, we see her with her black hair tied back in a low ponytail, looking both kind and resolute. She handed Sui some flowers and asked, "Great President Sui, do I have the honor of being your girlfriend?" Sui told her to work hard to prove it, and if she did well, she wouldn't regret it. Lu Rian was stunned and squeezed her hand, asking if she had truly accepted. Sui replied that she had already taken the flowers. Didn't she understand what that meant? She reminded her of the flowers she used to buy before. Had she ever accepted those? No, of course not. Lu Rian smiled brightly, celebrating that from now on, she was finally the partner she wanted to be. She declared she wouldn't give Sui a chance to break up and promised to take care of her for a lifetime. Sui hugged her and asked if she would still treat her well even if she never agreed to marry. Lu Rian understood her resistance to marriage and, being quite understanding, replied that as long as they never broke up, it was enough. She could be her girlfriend for life. After all, if things didn't work out, one could always get a divorce anyway. Lu Rian pretended to be annoyed, asking Sui if she really intended to be such a scoundrel. Sui simply asked if she wasn't allowed to be, to which Lu replied that she could, though she herself remained a hopeless romantic. She promised that even if Sui were a scoundrel, she would follow her everywhere for the rest of her life. We jump forward 2 years, to a time when Suyi's aunt was dying and asked to see her one last time. Naturally, Lu Rian went along. Seeing how Lu Rian cared for Sui every single moment, the aunt asked, sounding quite bewildered, what kind of trick she had used to keep a woman so devoted to her after more than a decade. Sui explained there was no trick, she simply liked her, but Lu knew perfectly well that Sui could live a very good life without her. Because of that, she felt she had to work twice as hard just to secure her place by her side. Her aunt was genuinely surprised, wondering if that was really how things worked. Sui just smiled at her and asked if she had finally learned her lesson. She told her to be more clever in her next life, and with that, her aunt took her last breath full of rage, ending a tragic and rather ridiculous life. As for Sui, her own life was beautiful and bright, with a very long and promising road still ahead of her.